A real distinction between the essence and the energies of God is a central principle of Eastern Orthodox Christian theology. Orthodox theologians generally regard this distinction as more than merely conceptual. This doctrine is most closely identified with Gregory Palamas of Thessaloniki, who formulated it as part of his defense of the Athonite monastic practice of hesychasmos against the charge of heresy brought by the humanist, scholar and theologian Barlaam of Calabria. These mystagogical teachings were approved in the Orthodox Church by a series of local hesychast councils in the 14th century, and Gregory's commemoration during the liturgical season of Great Lent is seen as an extension of the Sunday of Orthodoxy. Historically, Western Christian thought has tended to reject the essence-energies distinction as real in the case of God, characterizing the view as a heretical introduction of an unacceptable division in the Trinity and suggestive of polytheism. Further, the associated practice of hesychasm used to attain theosis was characterized as magic. More recently, some Roman Catholic thinkers have taken a positive view of Palamite teachings, including how Gregory understood the essence-energies distinction, arguing that it does not represent an insurmountable theological division between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Nature of the essence-energies distinction in God. According to Fr. John Romanides, Palamas considers the distinction between God's essence and his energies to be a real distinction. Romanides distinguishes this real distinction from the Thomistic virtual distinction and the Scotist a formal distinction. Romanides suspects that Barlaam accepted a formal distinction between God's essence and his energies. Many writers agree that Palamas views the distinction between the divine essence and the divine energies as a real distinction. A few scholars argue against describing Palamas's essence-energies distinction in God as a real distinction. For example, Orthodox philosophical theologian David Bentley Hart expresses doubt that Palamas ever intended to suggest a real distinction between God's essence and energies. According to Dominican Catholic theological historian Fr. Aidan Nichols, Palamas's essence-energies distinction is not a mere formal distinction. By a formal distinction, Nichols means a distinction merely demanded by the limited operating capacities of human minds. G. Phillips argues that Palamas's essence-energies distinction is not an ontological distinction but, rather, analogous to a formal distinction in the Scotist sense of the term. According to Anna N. Williams's study of Palamas, which is more recent than Bentley's and Phillips's, in two passages Palamas explicitly says God's energies are as constitutively and ontologically distinct from the essences of the three hypostases, and in one place he makes explicit his view, repeatedly implied elsewhere, that the essence and the energies are not the same. But Williams contends that not even in these passages did Palamas intend to argue for an ontological or fully real distinction, and that the interpretation of his teaching by certain polemical modern disciples of his is false. Western theologians, typically following the thought of Thomas Aquinas, admit no real distinction in God other than that between the three divine hypostases or personae, and these only in terms of their extrinsic relations with one another, neither between the singular essence of divinity and the three persons of the Trinity, nor between God's essence and his operations. They admit a real and intrinsic distinction, but only a virtual or a formal distinction. Synergy. The concept of synergy used to express the relationship of God with man, which as taught in the East was not only in dogma and proper context the transcendence of the limitations of pagan society and pagan philosophy. In his comparative history of philosophical thought in the two halves of late antiquity and medieval Christendom, David Bradshaw says that the word synergy would be the best with which to summarize in a single word the differences between the Eastern and Western traditions. Eastern Orthodox perspective. Robert E. Sinkovich describes Palamas' ultimate perspective as being the preservation of the reality of God's self-revelation and the divine economy of creation and salvation. Transcendence of God, essence of God. The concept of God's essence in Eastern Orthodox theology is called and is distinct from his energies or activities as actualized in the world. The ousia of God is God as God is. It is the energies of God that enable us to experience something of the divine, at first through sensory perception and then later intuitively and noetically. The essence being nature and substance of God is taught in Eastern Christianity as uncreated and incomprehensible. God's ousia is defined as that which finds no existence or subsistence in another or any other thing. God's ousia is beyond all states of consciousness and unconsciousness, being and non-being, beyond something and nothing, beyond existence and non-existence. God's ousia has no necessity as subsistence that needs or is dependent on anything other than itself. As uncreated, God's ousia is incomprehensible to any created being. God in essence is therefore superior to all forms of ontology. The source of God's ousia or incomprehensibleness is the Father hypostasis. God's energies are unbegotten or uncreated, just like the existences of God. Both God's existences and energies can be experienced or comprehended. God's ousia is uncreatedness, beyond existence, beyond no existence. God's hyperbeing is not comprehensible to created beings. As St. John Damascene states, all that we say positively of God manifests not his nature but the things about his nature. Distinction between created and uncreated for the Eastern Orthodox. The distinction as the tradition and perspective behind this understanding is that creation is the task of energy. If we deny the real distinction between essence and energy, we cannot fix any very clear borderline between the procession of the divine persons and the creation of the world. Both the one and the other will be equally acts of the divine nature. The being and the action of God then would appear identical, leading to the teaching of pantheism. Eastern Orthodox theologians assert that Western Christianity treats God's ousia as energeia and dunamis as part of the scholastic method in theology, which allows God's incomprehensibility to become comprehensible, by not making a distinction between God's nature and manifestation of things about God's nature. As Aristotle and pagan philosophy taught that God was the underlying substance, nature being essence of all things, making the very thing that makes God the same as God's created world and created beings. God's ousia then becomes detectable and experienced as a substance, essence being a nature, rather than God's hyperbeing as infinite and never comprehensible to a finite mind or consciousness. Therefore, pagan philosophy via metaphysical dialects sought to reconcile all of existence with mankind's reason, a rational faculty culminating into deification called henosis, where in pagan henosis all of creation is absorbed into the monad and then recycled back into created existence. Since in pantheism there is nothing outside of creation of the cosmos, including God, since God is the cosmos in pantheism, or rather meaning no ontology outside of the cosmos, whereas Orthodox Christianity strictly seeks soteriology as reconciliation of man with God called theosis. Mankind is not absorbed into the God's ousia or hypostasis or energies in theosis. Ousia here is a general thing, a generality. In this case ousia is the essence, nature, being, substance of the word God and concept of God. Various Orthodox theologians argue Western Christianity teaches that the essence of God can be experienced. They charge that Western Christianity's treatment is very much in line with the pagan speculative philosophical approach to the concept of God, since no distinction is made between God's essence and his works, acts that there is no distinction between God and the material or created world, cosmos. Gregory Palamas' distinction is denied in favor of pagan philosopher Aristotle's actus a potentia, uncreated as that which has no first cause and is not caused, in Eastern Orthodoxy therefore being the basis for understanding outside the realm of science. Atheism here being a denial of the uncreated, pagan philosophical metaphysics being an attempt to rationalize the uncreated. Immanence of God, existences of God. Christosianaris writes, Sons, whether in the case of God or in the case of man, does not exist apart from the specific person who gives it subsistence. Persons hypostasize essence, they give it an hypostasis, that is, real and specific existence. Essence exists only in persons. Persons are the mode of existence of excellence. God is infinite and hyperbeing is called the Father as origin of all things created and uncreated. God's hands that created the finite material world are the uncreated existences of God named the Son and God immaterial and in spirit. Since all of the existences of God as well as all things derive from the Father, what is uncreated as well as created also too comes from God the Father. The God as uncreated in ousia is infinite and is therefore beyond being or existence. The ousia of God is uncreated and is a quality shared as common between the existences of God. This in Eastern Christianity is called hyperbeing, above being. Realities of God. Orthodox doctrine teaches that there are three distinct realities of God. According to Clayton and Peacock, Palamas does not employ a simple dyadic contrast between essence and energy within God, nor yet a dyadic contrast between essence and hypostasis, but deliberately insists upon a three-pointed contrast between essence, energy and hypostasis. In Palamas' words, three realities pertain to God: essence, energy, and the triad of divine hypostasis. Economy of God. The divine economy, in the broadest sense, refers not only to God's actions to bring about the world's salvation and redemption, but to all of God's dealings with and interactions with the world, including the creation. In this sense, economy, as used in classical Orthodox doctrinal terminology, constituted the second broad division of all Christian doctrinal teaching. The first division was called theology and was concerned with all that pertains to God alone, in himself, the teaching on the Trinity, the divine attributes, and so on, but not with anything pertaining to the creation of the redemption. The distinction between omicron iota kappa omicron nu omicron mu iota alpha and theta epsilon omicron lambda omicron gamma iota alpha remains common to most of the Greek fathers and to all of the Byzantine tradition. Theta epsilon omicron lambda omicron gamma iota alpha means, in the 4th century, everything which can be said of God considered in himself outside of his creative and redemptive economy. To reach this theology, properly so called, one therefore must go beyond God as creator of the universe, in order to be able to extricate the notion of the Trinity from the cosmological implications proper to the economy. Ralph Del Cole explains that the divine energies and the hypostases are not identical. However, it is through the energies that the three hypostases are active in the divine economy. Lossky summarizes the working of the divine economy in relationship to the revelation distinction of the hypostases in the energies. In this dispensation, in which the Godhead is manifested in the energies, the Father appears as the possessor of the attribute which is manifested, the Son as the manifestation of the Father, the Holy Spirit as he who manifests. The presence of the energies is not to be taken as denial of the philosophical simplicity of God. Therefore, when speaking of God, it is acceptable within Eastern Orthodoxy to speak of his energies as God. These would include cataphatic appositive statements of God like the list of St. Paul's energies of God, God being love, faith and hope and knowledge. As is also the case of Gregory of Palamas that God is grace and deifying illumination. In the life of the believer, the important theological and soteriological distinction remains that people experience God through his energies, not his essence. Traditionally, the energies have been experienced as light, such as the light of Mount Tabor that appeared at the Transfiguration, the light that appeared to St. Paul on the road to Damascus, the light that appeared to the apostles in the book of Acts chapter 2 verse 3. Orthodox tradition likewise holds that this light may be seen during prayer by particularly devout individuals, such as the saints. In addition, it is considered to be eschatological in that it is also considered to be the light of the age to come, or the kingdom of heaven, the reign of God, which is the Christ. Eastern Orthodox criticism of Western theology. Eastern Orthodox theologians have criticized Western theology, and especially its traditional claim that God is actus purus, for its alleged incompatibility with the essence-energies distinction. Christosianaris writes, the West confuses God's essence with his energy, regarding the energy as a property of the divine essence and interpreting the latter as pure energy. According to George C. Papademetrio, the essence-energies distinction is contrary to the Western confusion of the uncreated essence with the uncreated energies, and this is by the claim that God is actus purus. Byzantine and Russian philosophy. I. Erodiakonus Katerina, Byd Acuten, Borya. Byzantine philosophy. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Bibliography. Vladimir Lossky, The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, SVS Press, 1997. James Clark and Amp Co. Limited, 1991. Google Books. David Bradshaw, Aristotle, East and West. Metaphysics and the Division of Christendom, Cambridge University Press, 2004. ISBN 0-52182865-1, ISBN 9780-52182865-9. Google Books.